nonfiction, of course, but she kind of does everything. We and I think at the heart of it is really a very curious person who likes to learn and find out about new things and discover new writers and new books every year. It's probably cliche by now, but I always use the phrase that get ready to grow your reading list every October, because that's really what people walk away with. And so yeah, that's who LitFest is, I guess. I hope that's sufficient. Amanda, why don't you go next?
Absolutely. I can't wait to come to LitFest, Fawnda. I just want to say I can't wait to come when I can finally go in person. The Fold stands for the Festival of Literary Diversity. We are a festival and charitable organization based in Brampton, and we hold two festivals. We hold the May Festival of Literary Diversity, which is focused on books from YA up to adult literature. And then in the fall, we hold the Fold Kids Book Fest, which focuses on literature from teeny tiny little humans up to the YA area. And we focus on a wide representation of stories from a wide representation of writers from across Canada. And we like to focus and prioritize stories by marginalized writers. So stories from communities that maybe haven't traditionally had the opportunity to appear at literary festivals before. And we are, in terms of personality, I guess you could call us the young upstart. We've only been around for about 6 years. So we're still, still sort of carving out our space in the landscape. And it's a wonderful community to be a part of. So I'm really grateful to be a part of the Fold and grateful to be a part of the wider community of literary festivals in Canada as well.
Who would like to go next to introduce our festivals as people?
I'll pop in here.
Great, thank you.
I'm Charlene Diehl, and I'm based in Winnipeg. And it's great to meet you, Amanda. I mean, I've talked to you quite a bit, but this is one of the interesting things about festivaling. We are all connected to one another, but often don't get to be in the very same place at the same time. So yes, you guys are upstarts. I have just finished my 18th year in the director's chair here in Winnipeg, and we are 25 years old, which still seems like a growth phase. And of course, when the pandemic showed up, we had to grow in a whole new set of ways. I'd like to borrow some of Fawnda's language. I'd say we also are curious, maybe a little bit sassy. I like to think of us as being adventurous and a little bit curious about finding writers and voices that are not mainstream and that readers might not otherwise encounter. So I think this is one of the functions that I sense for my community, that I kind of want to bring attention to some of the writers that aren't necessarily getting all the hype or all the promotion. We mostly feature Canadian writers, and as of this year, we now also, like Fold, host 2 festivals, one in September, which is basically YA up to adult and across all genres and all styles. And we now have Thin Air Kids, which takes place in February. It just was getting to be too burdensome to try to manage a really active school program at the same time as we were doing all our other adult programming. So we're still kind of getting our footing there. Yeah, I think we're kind of, I don't know, just endlessly excited. I'm always excited about books, and I'm always curious to see what's going to happen each year, and fascinated to see what writers in this country and elsewhere, but primarily this country, are doing. I just think it's an extraordinary community to be a part of and representing. So that's us.
Okay, and I'm Shelley, and I will take the final slot. So, because my last name starts with Y, I always go last. Wordfest, we think of ourselves as a connector. So we think of ourselves as the exclamation point between the book being written and the book being read. We are very author focused. The book we think of as the t-shirt. So you come to a Wordfest event or show, we think of ourselves as very theatrical. So we try to make things exciting and accessible. We are not stuffy. We appeal to all ages and all backgrounds. And the thing that excites us the most is when you have people who are 80 with people who are 18, when you have somebody who has never read a book at all and leaves just totally turned on by ideas and creativity and just a larger sense of the world, both inner and outer. We started off as a festival, so this is our 26th year, but we've grown. So we do year-round programming. We would do up to 180 events a year, which was insane. When the pandemic struck, we decided that we would actually become a secondary person, almost like they're identical twin Wordfests, except it's called Imagine on Air. And so we now have a digital programming entity that puts on online shows, and we created a literary streaming channel where we think it's the first in the world, where you can watch these shows on demand. We put a lot of effort into our production values because, again, if you come to a Wordfest show, we want you to believe that it's the only thing you would want to do on any given evening, that it's not your fifth choice, it's your first choice, and that you're going to leave, just like everybody else has said, curiouser, a better human, and wanting to bring people back for the next author experience and book experience. Amanda, for example, is going to be appearing in a Wordfest online show on December the 2nd with a new book she's got called Tongues. So she's part of our storytelling online series, and it's called The Way We Speak. So there's a plug.
This is fantastic, everyone. Thank you very much for introducing your festival to this audience. And the reason why we call it the 101 series is because it's meant for people who are not familiar from the inside of the ecosystem of literary production and dissemination in Canada. So I thank you very much for being so clear about what your festival stands for. Now, in terms of those people for whom we really want to do this panel, could you tell us about each of your festivals' submission policies, or how do people submit? How do, let's say, up-and-coming authors or independent publishers, do you have room for them? How does it work? And what's the difference in between the way you work with bigger publishers and authors and the way you work with smaller and independent authors and publishers? Who wants to go first?
I don't mind taking a first run at this one.
Thanks.
Okay, so in Winnipeg, yeah, we have developed certain kind of protocols with the submission process because we do receive a lot of submissions every year, sort of somewhere in the several hundreds. So there's quite a long and kind of careful exercise to curate our festival. I think one of the things that is very high priority for me is this notion of curation. I want us to be responsible for gathering a group of writers and then finding ways to group those writers together so that that their voices will interact and sort of resonate with one another. So we rarely receive submissions directly from writers, although it does sometimes happen. We more typically work with publishers. And so if you are a person who has published professionally, you need to nag away at your publisher to submit on your behalf. Normally, our publishers offer us a chunk of manuscript or a digital ARC, advanced reading copy, or a finished reading copy, print reading copy, and we gather all those things and read and sort and kind of figure out how we do our curation piece. As I say, sometimes we do get submissions directly from writers, not as often. Partly my preference is for the publisher to be handling the burden on behalf of the writer. I think writers already do a lot. So I don't necessarily want to have any more weight of responsibility kind of loaded on to people who are already working and for whom this is kind of the side hustle. You know, your job as a writer is to make the best possible books you can. And the job of your publisher is to make the best book they can and then try to get it in front of readers. So we actually, I think we try very hard to not really have any difference in the way we deal with the large publishers and the small publishers. I'm very interested in independent publishing in this country. Probably my heart goes toward the more experimental writing, the more adventurous writing. And often the small houses are doing a lot more, are able to take a lot more risks because they are not committed to as large a print run. On the flip side of that is they have a much smaller staff, so they can't necessarily, and finances, so they can't necessarily do the same level of promotion. Over the years, we've worked really hard to develop really good relationships with the publicists at all of the publishing houses, and we have a wide open submission process that invites submissions from anywhere, from anyone. We'll take it, look at it, and see if we can make it fit. Because we are part of the larger ecosystem, we are mostly going to be presenting books that are quite new, because we're also trying to be part of the publisher's need to market their new titles. That's me.
Great, thank you, Charlene. Who wishes to go next?
I can go. So at the Fold, we typically start to take pitches about 6 months before each given festival. So for the Festival of Literary Diversity in May, we start to take pitches right about now in sort of late October, early November kind of time. And we really build the festival list over December and January. And then for the Kids Fest, we start to take pitches for that in around April, May. So 6 months before that festival happens, which is usually in November. And we take pitches from anywhere. Publishers from all across the country, whether big publishers or independents, can submit to us. And we do also have a forum on our website, which opens again during that sort of 6 month before period, opens for a limited time, and we do take pitches from self-published authors as well. And then once we have all of our pitches together, we take everything to the Fold planning team, which is a team of about 20 volunteers who meet monthly to talk about the festival and figure out how we're going to curate the list for a given year. And we go through the pitches that we've received and look at what sorts of themes have come out. So what we usually try and do in the 6 months before Big Fold happens, we call them Big Fold and Little Fold now. So before Big Fold happens in May, we meet and we usually try and have some themes in mind. So we'll go into our pitch meetings with publishers thinking that we'd like to maybe talk about this, or we'd like to have some panels on XYZ. Usually, inevitably, what happens is we meet with publishers and then they pitch us authors who may fit into some of the panels or may not, and then other ideas for panels come out of that. So the curation process happens fairly organically after we've gotten all the pitches, kind of like Charlene was saying, where you sort of see what you've got and then things start to come together. We do also do a number, we're not doing our reading series right now. We have a quarterly reading series at the Rose Theatre in Brampton, and that is currently on hiatus, of course, because of the pandemic. But we do also take pitches from publishers for that throughout the year. And we also have social media initiatives throughout the year, like our Title Tuesdays on social media, and then our reading challenge, where every month we feature a different kind of challenge that inspires readers to read different books, or maybe consider literature that they hadn't thought of before. And we take pitches from publishers all year round for those particular things. So we try and keep it as open a process as possible. We really, just as everyone has been saying, we really love to be able to give voice and give space to some voices that maybe have not had as much exposure before. And leaving avenues for self-published authors and independently published authors, as well as the big houses and the mid houses and all that sort of thing, has been a great way for us to do that. And then also to continue taking the temperature of, you know, who is talking about what in literature in the country at any given time, because it's changing so much. I mean, even, you know, from 5 years ago, 6 years ago, when we first had our first festival, it's changed a lot. So, and then throw a pandemic in on top of all of that, and, you know, revolution basically is what's been going on. So yeah, that's how we work.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Fawnda?
Well, I thought Shelley was going to jump in, but fine, I'll go. Yeah, the process for LitFest is not very different than what folks have already been saying. We take pitches mostly from publishers. There are some that come from independent writers as well. And publishers large and small. Usually, because our festival is in October, those pitches really start rolling in kind of February, March. And then we have a deadline on our website that says May 31st is the deadline for every year, but really we will take pitches at any time, because there are always things that change even over the summer, and we kind of have programming spots that we can fill in as well. We do have events every year that we kind of directly try and find roles that will or authors or books that will fit in those events. And for those, I'm thinking of, you know, our food event in the Before Times, the Food Matters stuff, because we have the wonderful world of nonfiction is full of food writers and also cookbooks. And so we would take advantage of that in terms of like one of our really popular events. And then also Memoir. Memoir is something that we generally curate at least one event around. We also, when we are putting together the festival with publishers, I often ask which writers may be willing to teach workshops or master classes to offer something that's a little bit different than, say, a feature reading, or I want to be on a panel, or that kind of thing. So in terms of the pitches that are interesting to hear, if there's anything that's different, or you have a cool idea that you think some of your writers might be into, or a book lends well to a certain kind of presentation, theatrical, artistic, however, we're interested in hearing that, and kind of, you know, because audiences also like the variety too. So so yeah, I guess that would be the only thing that I could add that's a little different from the norm.
Fawnda, thank you. Shelley.
Good. Okay, so here's what I can say about the wealth of opportunity that is national in this country, which is there are so many different festivals that happen at different points in the year. And every festival, as Luciana said, has a flavor, has a point of view, has a take. And so if for whatever reason your book doesn't resonate with Wordfest, it might resonate with the Fold. It might resonate with the Sunshine Coast Writers Festival. So that's a way of saying that we actually have so much diversity within how we all curate, that, you know, paying attention nationally to big and small, and there are experiences that are going to fit you and what you're doing. So I just want to start off by saying that, and that's good. It means that there's opportunity for everyone. And so I think each of us have kind of a curatorial lens that we're applying. In the case of Wordfest Festival, which happens in October, it's called the Imaginarium. It is by nature diverse. We do all genres. We do cookbooks, we do memoir, we do literary fiction, we do a lot of sports. We want to go where readers are passionate. And so, you know, don't limit yourself thinking that you have to write a certain kind of book or you have to publish a certain kind of book. I think that would be true for many of us, that, you know, let us decide if you fit. Don't self-censor yourself when you're approaching all of us, because we might see connections that you don't necessarily see. So, you know, give us a chance. We also work with the bigger publishers. We tend to work a lot with the bigger publishers, and I'm just being honest about that. But the bigger publishers now are publishing more independent authors, authors that wouldn't have gotten major publishing deals. So, you know, that also is a trend that has changed. But the indies we adore. So there's definitely room for indies. We do not treat you in any way differently. Every author is paid. Every author gets the hotel room. Every author gets the per diem. Every author gets treated like a superstar. And again, I think that is true for every single one of us. None of us would differentiate. If you're welcome to our festivals, you're a star, and we treat you that way. For Wordfest, you know, now that we're online, you can actually see a lot of our formats, and you can get a sense of our flavor and the kinds of things we look for. We are very idea forward. So we're not so much a reader, like a reading festival. We don't ask authors to read from their books as their presentation. We like conversation primarily. We like storytelling. That we like to have experiential events. And so a certain kind of author is going to thrive in that experience, and some other authors don't. And again, that just gives you a sense that maybe there's another festival that really fits your gift. So yeah, that's sort of how I would phrase all of that.
I really love the diversity of answers that I'm hearing, because that hopefully opens up, like you were saying, Shelley, these windows of opportunities for independent, smaller publishers and authors, so that they can nudge their publishers eventually. So
I just hop in for 1 second to just one little footnote.
Yes.
On responding to Shelley. I guess the other side of the big coin about where do you fit well is, I would really urge people not to feel shattered if they don't get a festival spot. The number of writers that any of us can feature in a big festival for us, we're looking at about 50 to 60. And when you when you look at that in comparison with, say, 350 pitches, everyone is, even really, really great books. The hardest time of year for me is the time when we have to do the winnowing. It feels like the slaughterhouse, and there's so many great books that don't get the attention. So I try to say this often to people in my community who are like, well, I don't know why my book isn't in. I think, well, you actually don't know, but you were one book of 300, and in your particular area, there were several others that connected a little bit better, or we just hosted you 2 years ago, and so we're trying to make room for other writers. So that's just sort of a little footnote. There's not enough room for all the books that are published each year. I think if you are not watching this, you don't know that there are like thousands. So it's hard to feel courageous if you're one voice in 1,000. It's quite possible that your voice, even if no one's ever heard it before, is going to be very exciting to one of us. But if it's not, please stick with it and make another book, because the next pitch might be the one that hits.
Thank you. In terms of smaller publishers, larger publishers, with all these, what your festival considers for, as a submission, then you have the other side, what keeps the festival alive, besides the going public and the paying public. And with the pandemic, that has probably highlighted a bit more, and that's sponsorship. So could you please tell us, how does sponsorship work within your festivals? How do larger publishers sponsor the festival? How do you organize that? Or is there a system in place for sponsorships in your festivals? Who wants to go first?
I will, because we're bad at it. It's hard to curate a festival, organize a festival, do all the festival-y things, and go and find sponsorship money too. It's essential. I'm in Calgary, where there is very little money, which is, I think, maybe a shock to people in the rest of the country, how much corporate sponsorship and community dollars have dried up. We are a struggling community. So there isn't a lot of money, and we do not get a lot of money from the publishers. So I'm just being honest there. So we really are supported by our box office and our donors and the federal grants and the local grants.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'll sort of jump in there and reiterate a little bit with Shelley. I mean, at least in Alberta, a little bit, the sponsorship money, that corporate sponsorship money that used to be around is not exactly the same. Also coming from theater, I find that the sponsorship is very different in the literary community than it is in theater, where they can usually sponsor, say, a building or something like that. So where it comes for us, often we'll partner with, say, like a local business that sponsors the venue or sponsors something. A lot of our actual partnership and sponsorship comes more in kind through a lot of smaller outfits like Edify magazine and things like that than they do from like the really, really big bucks. We don't get money from big name publishers, other than that maybe they will send their authors, like they'll cover the travel for their authors to get here, or they'll buy an ad in our program sometimes. Yeah, beyond that, there's not a lot of actual dollar investment, other than sometimes if say like a particular event will have certain costs tied to it, a publisher may help directly with those costs through a bit of a cash sponsorship to make sure that the event can actually happen in the parameters that they want it to. But those are generally special cases. So that's just sort of an example. But yeah, I'll let Charlene take it, or whoever else, or Amanda as well.
Well, we've never really had corporate money in Manitoba. So we kind of looked at Alberta longingly for a while, but no longer, since it's a bit dry everywhere, I think. So yeah, we don't have sponsors, or at least very few. I was absolutely shocked to get a call this year from a legal company, a practice, who said, "Hey, you know, one of our writers has a book in your festival this year. We want to be a sponsor." Like I nearly fainted. So sponsorship is not common, and there's definitely not, you know, thousands of dollars attached to it. Much more what Fawnda's saying, you might get 10 pizzas, you know. And it's when I was first starting this business, one of my predecessors said, okay, the thing about in kind is you have to figure out, do you actually want the thing that's coming your way? Is it, you know, is this something that's actually more burden than help, which is sometimes the way. And I guess that's true of other kinds of sponsorship too, because often if a company steps up, they want certain things from you, and you have to decide if it is within, you know, the work that you're doing or the value system that you have, whether or not you're willing to make that kind of bargain. We depend largely on funding from all levels of government. I spend a ton of my year writing grant reports, grant applications, grant reports. I scrounge for money all the time. We don't have much box office because people in Winnipeg are notoriously cheap. They'll go to stuff for free if they feel like it. And if they have to pay a ticket, unless it's hockey, they don't like to pay for anything. So it's an ongoing challenge for us. And sometimes it's probably it's the piece that exhausts me, I would say, as a director. It's the part that's exhausting and kind of dispiriting. As for the big publishers and small publishers across the board, I play hardball with them. And if a writer is traveling, they pay the travel, or I don't bring the writer. I don't care how fancy they are. That's my bottom line. I don't have the resources for that. It doesn't always work out. And sometimes I've lost a writer that I really wanted to pitch, but I felt like I was kind of playing chicken. And when I get into a full chicken game, I'm not going to step back. And also I think especially oddly enough, it's the large publishers who tend to play chicken more. And that just pisses me off. Okay, that's candor from my side. Amanda.
Well, I can echo that candor, Charlene, because we have found that as well. It's funny listening to all of you. I mean, we're in a bit of a different situation in that we've actually been kind of lucky over the last, I'd say, 3 years in terms of sponsorship. We did have someone come on about 3 years ago as a lead corporate sponsor for the festival, which has allowed us to, expand the festival a little bit and also do additional initiatives like our reading challenge that we do throughout the year. But we do, that sponsorship aside, we do rely mostly on grants. So a large portion of my year is filling out grant applications and then, filling out grant reports. It's a never ending cycle. And that, can be a tricky dance as well, because just as when you have a sponsorship, there's that question of like, what do they get in exchange for what you're giving them, and how do you structure that? I find that can often happen with grant funding as well, right? A grantor is maybe funding a particular event, or they want to fund a particular initiative, but you need to check a whole bunch of boxes, right? Like you need to make sure you have a certain number of Canadian authors, and all of which is great and fine. And we're very, very grateful to all levels of funding, but it's a tricky dance, right? And it definitely impacts the way that you imagine your festival and the way that you structure your plans going forward. In Brampton, like our festival is still relatively small. This year we were lucky enough, because we were entirely virtual, to have a whole bunch of authors from all over the place, and we had about 70 plus authors, and we probably won't be doing that again anytime soon. So normally we have anywhere from sort of 25 to 30 authors over the course of about 3 or 4 days. And because the festival has been smaller, we've been able to kind of shape things in terms of funding and get creative with a lot of in-kind stuff, yes, but also just how the festival itself is structured. We also have a lot of support from Brampton, the city itself. So they have a municipal funding program for festivals and marquee events that has been instrumental in helping us guide the festival during its first sort of 5-6 years. And then we were, in 2019, we were made a charitable organization. So that opened up a charitable donation stream of funding. So the goal really is to have like a 3-pronged funding model, where we have sponsorships, and then we have sponsorships and donations, and then granting, and then of course ticket revenue. And oddly enough, making the switch to virtual has really widened, as it has done for so many of us, I know, has really widened our audience. And this year for the May Festival, we had a real bump in revenue because we were able to charge for tickets. And we had people from all across the country coming in. There's also, we do a lot of work with schools, and there's a certain amount of revenue and revenue possibilities that come with working directly with school boards and facilitating programming there, which I know everybody else on the panel here can attest to that, I'm sure. So it's just, it is stressful though, holding a festival and doing all of the planning and the programming and the fundraising and the administrative stuff for the granting at the end. It's you're never bored. There's that, right? But I think there's a great infrastructure. It definitely can be improved for sure, but I think there's a great infrastructure for arts funding, especially from the granting bodies in this country. And I hope that can continue, and that, in these times, granting bodies and sponsors can really pay attention to what innovation means, and really try and think differently about where their dollars are going.
I do want to jump in for a quick sec to off of that point. The funding bodies have been remarkably consistent and even better than they were before during the pandemic. Mm-hmm. Funding bodies are frankly the only reason that a lot of our organizations could keep going at all. Whereas sponsors have been, it's kind of like one way or the other. Some of them have really embraced the technology and everything. And then another longtime sponsor that we had this year also said that they only wanted to support if it was in-person events. And if you know what the COVID situation in Alberta was like in September, to hear that from a sponsor, knowing that we may have to pivot completely online at any time was scary, you know, and to think about just that money in the budget. Like the funding bodies are sort of like this sort of beautiful source of consistency and sustainability and safety. So if you know, as publishers in the literary community can keep in mind that and they're really what keeps the ticket pricing accessible, I think, across the board when there is ticket pricing. So yeah, I do think that that is something to keep in mind, because corporate sponsorship, even if you do have, say, a 2 or 3 year commitment from a sponsor, after those 2 or 3 years dry up, that sponsor goes away, that can be a huge hole to make up for. And then, you know, but the programming expectations often don't drop off in the same way. So that's another thing to kind of keep in mind when you're thinking about where the festivals really get their support. It's not really from sponsors, it really is mostly from public funding.
And exactly. And I wanted to just add one more thing that's unique to Calgary, to Wordfest, which is our partnerships, which are not, I mean, we think of ourselves as in partnership with everyone. So that's one of our guiding principles, is that whether you're an author or a publisher or a community person, we feel like we're your partner. But we do have a really significant partner, and it's the Calgary Public Library. And so they gave Wordfest access to the second floor of the oldest library in Alberta, Memorial Park Library, and told us to turn it into a performance space. So that is where our offices are. That is where we are able to do 140 seat shows. They don't pay us, but we don't pay rent. And it has been a lifesaver. And it's also part of an ecosystem. And I think that's something that I know that all of us would probably want to talk about. In the case of the Writers Guild, we see ourselves in the same ecosystem. So at Wordfest, we don't do a lot of writer-oriented programming, because we have the Alexandra Writers Center and we have the Writers Guild, who do that kind of writer-focused programming. We try to figure out what no one else is doing. And that's where we don't do smaller events that are 40 people and under, because that's where the bookstores bring in their clientele, where they keep themselves going. And so, you know, we try to program in partnership with everyone else on an ecosystem level. And in terms of our school program, there's so many really great early literacy programs, including the public library, but Calgary Reads. The little kids don't need us. So we focus on teenagers. And what we found, which is a little different than the Fold, is that schools here, there's incredible inequity in who gets that enrichment. And so we made a decision 3 years ago that we were not going to charge anyone, that we were going to make all of our youth programming accessible and free. And so that's been something that we've gone to foundations and our donors to be able to provide our programming for free. And so it's usually adult authors talking directly to teenagers about big ideas for free. And that's the only way that we could figure out how to make it equitable. But we have to do it with donors. We can't afford it. I mean, the authors still have to get paid, and it still has to be professionally organized.
Thank you. This has been super enlightening. It's interesting to look at things from the different perspectives, from, you know, the nitty-gritty of the day-to-day, having to write the grants, like Charlene was explaining, to the municipal funding, sponsorship, to the, you know, ecosystem concept. This has been super eye-opening. And yes, Vern wants to, you know, would like to ask questions, and please, Vern, go right ahead. I was going to invite you to join in the conversation right now.
I'm trying to start my video here. Can you see me?
Yep. Yes.
Oh, sorry. I'm having so many internet problems here, so I really, really apologize. I just wanted to thank you all for, like, this is an amazing conversation. I'm learning so much, and I'm so appreciative of everything that you're doing, especially since I've been working with all writers from all kinds of genres this year. And I may have missed some of the things that you were saying, but one of the things I'm curious about is whether or not your festivals are open to different genres. Obviously, I am a playwright, and it's very rare because playwrights on the plankton of the food chain, literary food chain. Whether you're working with other genres, I know personally, even though I've won the Gigi, I've been invited to exactly one literary festival in my life. But that's beyond the point. I'm wondering if you're looking outside of the standard poetry, fiction, and nonfiction genres to memoir, and you may have already addressed this, but to playwriting, to memoir, fantasy, the spec, fic, all that kind of stuff. So if you could just comment on that, even if I've missed it, that would be awesome. Thank you.
I can start on this one. Yeah, we do program all across all genres, everything from the standard, you know, the straight up fiction, nonfiction, poetry, but we also program playwrights. We also program graphic novels, speculative fiction, mysteries. One of the reasons we might not have invited you, Vern, is because your publisher is probably not submitting. I usually have to go, you know, bang down the doors of the theater publishers to get any sort of drama submissions. I think a lot of those publishers don't think about this being a setting for them.
Charlene, that was one of my questions was to you, is whether or not the publishers are not submitting. So that was one of the issues I was wondering about. Continue.
Yeah, often they don't. Sometimes they do. I think it's sometimes a little tricky. No, I'll go back up. One of the things that I think is a playwright is usually a fantastic reader. So since we're not like Shelley, we're much more of a performance oriented, we have a performance focus with conversations kind of around it. And so I love to have playwrights because, wow, can they ever share their work? It's just spectacular. So generally, if I see something that is showing up on my radar, I will go in search of it. And we do have one play publishing company here in Winnipeg. So I usually bang down the door there and say, "Is there something you want us to look at?" But yeah, I like to program a range of genres, partly because I kind of want my audience to get surprised. I think most readers get a little bit stodgy in their reading practices. And so, you know, they only read nonfiction or they only like, you know, fantasy novels. But, you know, I can't even count the number of times that I've talked to somebody on the stage who said, I actually hate poetry, but wow, that was great. You know, it's like, you just don't know, right? People are very sure that they know what they like and don't like. But I think one of the things about a festival is you have a chance to encounter something you don't know. And sometimes it's that surprise that can kind of crash open some doors and just make a little bit more porous boundaries for folks and audiences.
Thank you.
Thank you. I was just wondering about the element of risk in literature. So thank you, Charlene, for bringing that point, and thanks, Vern, for your question. Now I would like the other audience members, if they have any other questions. Would anybody like to ask anything to the panel? You're welcome to ask anything. It's your chance.
Hi, I'll ask something. It's Audrey here. I really appreciate you having this event. It's really informative, and I appreciate the presenters coming and sharing their experience. One of the things that I'm curious about is how you constitute your suite of readers, I guess. I heard quite a bit of description from, let's see, I'm looking for you. Amanda. Yeah, Amanda, you talked a little bit about, the group of 20 volunteers. I'm just curious what kind of profile those volunteers have. Are they writers? Are they just, people from all different kinds of professions or walks of life who read, or librarians, or kind of what's the, I guess we talked about ecosystem. What's the ecosystem like of that group that does that choosing? Thanks.
That is a great question, Audrey. Thank you for asking. So it's really important for us at the Fold to, again, be elevating marginalized voices, and that's every step of the way. So not just marginalized voices on the stage, in our productions, but behind the scenes as well. So the 20 person planning team is very diverse in a number of different ways. We have a lot of marginalized, racialized communities. We have several members identify as disabled or mentally having mental health issues. And for the some of them are educators as well. A lot of them are just readers and lovers of literature. We also, and this might be of interest possibly, our board of directors who don't necessarily make programming decisions, but they are responsible for guiding the sort of sustainable future of the organization. Our board of directors is also very racially diverse, ability diverse, but also there are a few people who are business people on there, and they have been crucial and very, very instrumental in guiding the organization and helping us make sound, smart business decisions in the first couple years of our organization and going forward. For our Kids Festival, we have a planning team specifically for the Kids Festival as well, also diverse in all of the ways I've talked about, but this panel or this group is specifically made of educators. So they are making decisions or giving us guidance in terms of like when to hold the festival. We used to hold it in September, and they suggested moving it back to November so that teachers would have some time to get used to the classes before thinking about where the classes would fit in terms of programming and that sort of thing. So yeah, that's where it comes from. And we do, and I'm sure everybody has mechanisms for this. We do feedback surveys every year at every festival. So we're constantly taking feedback from our audience, our authors as well, and also our sponsors in terms of, how they experience the festival and experience exposure. And when I say sponsors, I mean grantors and sponsors as well. So there's a revolving door, not revolving door, but like revolving wheel of input and insight. And we're constantly growing, and that having those different viewpoints with us all along the way has been really, really crucial to that development.
Thank you very much, Amanda. That's such a full-fledged answer. Fantastic. Now, I think Diana Gaviria had a question that she wanted to ask. Diana?
Some of you are already sort of touched on how the pandemic has affected festivals, and I was just sort of curious if you envision sort of the digital element sticking around post-pandemic. And then the second question that I had was just wondering what your personal favorite events have been that your festivals have hosted over the years.
I can hop in here for a quick one. We all of us had to pivot to the virtual realm when the pandemic showed up. It really just turned everybody upside down. We took a little bit of a different approach to virtual programming in that we secured a stabilization grant that was specifically to help organizations like ours get through sort of survive pandemic. And I knew one thing we didn't have was a really great digital platform. So with some money we were able to secure, we had an actual destination festival site built for our festival, and then a second one built for Thin Air Kids. So it's a place where when the festival is on, that site is open and you can navigate through it. And what we opted to do, because I was finding that I was getting overbooked and very Zoom exhausted. So at the start, what I decided we were going to try, and we're still kind of finessing, but we invited our writers to pre-record content, short videos, and then we post them to that website. And then that website is open 24/7 for the length of the festival. We extended the length of the festival, so it's nearly a month. But we also found that we could give our writers a little bit more flexibility in what they wanted to share. We've had some really cool stuff. We had a cooking demonstration. We had this year we had a wig making demonstration, which was kind of one of the background pieces for one of the books that was being featured. So we found we've had neighborhood walks and talks about research and all sorts of things. And then we sort of have the more reading or performance stuff on top of that, and some Zoom conversations. But one of the things that I have really enjoyed about that is that it also releases our visitors from being stuck on a schedule. So several folks in my life actually really struggle with mental health challenges or other kinds of accessibility challenges, and being able to just head to a website at a time when it works for them. If it's 3 o'clock in the morning and they are not sleeping, they can sort of wander through things, and the speed can be sort of the speed and pathway is in their control as opposed to the presenter's control. That is something that we will maintain. We had both these platforms built with this idea that we will kind of run this digital platform, which is more of a destination space, and then we'll start plugging events into that. This year we did have 8 hybrid events and about 5 or 6 others that were real-time Zoom events where people could log in. But we really focused more of our energy on assembling, more like a buffet of creative content than a schedule of creative content.
That's excellent. Those are awesome ideas. And I really like that strategy. And personally, like someone who's really busy, sometimes you have conflicts, and this way you can kind of like take in content and different discussions at your own time and pace. So that's really cool. I appreciate that.
The hardest part about it is when you don't have a time attached, that the impetus to visit can get very soft. So you might say, I'm going to go over there on Thursday, and then Thursday turns into Sunday, it turns into next week, and you sort of forget if it's still on or not. So that's been one of our challenges, is to try to be right up in people's faces. But It's been fun.
Thank you very much, Diana, for your question. Any of the panelists would like to answer that question, or would like to say something in regards to their memories of festivals past and a beautiful event that you guys want to talk about? Maybe one of you, so we can just leave this panel on a nice, lovely, hopeful note that these events are taking place.
I can't pick a favorite. It's like the cliche child. I just maybe want to say that I think the work that we all do is so very special, and the communities that we are all focused on building are so very special in so many different ways. And I think, as difficult as the pandemic has been, it has really offered a real opportunity for festivals to rethink what community means. And so I guess that, even more than one specific event, like thinking about that community and how it's a community made up of a whole variety of events and a whole variety of people, that is my favorite part, I guess, is where I'll leave it.
Thank you. If anyone else wants to say anything, feel free. Any other of the panelists?
Yeah, I just want to say that, we have not done a live event since March of 2020. I think we were one of the few people that just went completely online, and we did it deliberately and intentionally. and also because Alberta was a hellhole of chaos. And I didn't want to kill anyone because that doesn't help any of us. But I do think that when we think, just even that asking that question, Diana, my heart is in that connection piece. My heart is when I can give someone a hug, when I can bring someone over to the bookstore table and show them a book that I'm just dying for them to see. When you watch people come by themselves into a space and not feel alone. When you watch an author get that immediate feedback, they've been alone in their rooms for years, some of them, and this is their chance to be in the world with this thing that they've created. It is really magical. There is still, when done well, there is an intimacy that you get with an online. If it's produced properly, you do get incredible intimacy online as well, because people forget they're on camera and they just are talking in the middle of the dark to each other. And it's like 3 a.m. in the writer's lounge, and you're listening to 2 brilliant, generous people having a really great conversation, but now it's open to everyone. I mean, there's something about people who don't like to be in public, who maybe because they're physically unable to be in a crowded room, and suddenly they can also engage with what we're doing, and they're part of this extended community. There are people in Calgary that can go to the Fold, or can go to LitFest, or can go to Thin Air. So, I think that we're going to take the good of what we've had to go through and try to knit it into the kind of ongoing good that we always had. I mean, I think what you're seeing with all of us is that even though I never want to write another grant report as long as I live, and I do want us all to band together and just tell them all, just give us the money, we're good people, we do good things. I still wake up every morning grateful. And I think that's something that we would all say we share.
Thank you very much, Shelley. These words mean a lot to all of us, especially at the WGA and the Edmonton Public Library. We really want to thank you for having joined us. We really had a great conversation. And I think that there was some intimacy in this group, because at one point I forgot we were being recorded, and I just got to enjoy and listen to everything that you were saying, the wealth of experience that the 4 of you carry. Yes, thank you for being able to bridge all these distances in all kinds. With that, I want to thank everyone. Thank you. Shall we say farewell?
Thank you. It was so nice to catch up with everyone too.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks for organizing.
Before you turn this off, Luciana, I also just want to say thank you for joining us this evening. And I'm so, as somebody who's running an arts organization and know how challenging it is, that whole thing about writing grants, it's just like, I so get there. So thank you so much. And, I've had so many meetings with writers who during the pandemic have decided to write, this is the time that they're going to write. And I've met with over 300 people this year already. And it's just like, there is so much talent coming down the pipe for your festivals. And I'm so deeply grateful for the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Yes, I agree. And with that, we all say goodbye. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone.
Good night.
Night.